Hello and welcome to the Joe's Art History Podcast, a podcast which celebrates all things art historical every single day. Today I sit down and have a discussion with cultural and lifestyle blogger Lauren Mallin about a particular passion of hers which caught my attention via Instagram, which is the Disney archive. Lauren first came to my attention when I found her rather by happy accident when someone recommended a look at her current A to Z history of Disney. And the first post, A, was for archives. So I contacted Lauren to see if she'd be keen at all to sit down and have a chat with me about the history of the Disney archives. And luckily for myself and for all you lucky listeners, she agreed. This is an incredibly interesting conversation that discusses the importance of company archives and just really cements why Walt Disney was so important. And I hope you enjoy listening as much as I did recording this with Lauren. Just a word of warning before we continue. This conversation was recorded during lockdown and over the internet, so in places the audio is not fantastic. To be honest, we were a bit up against it that day. We'd had problems sort of connecting the recording to begin with, and then my microphone decided to play up. So just being honest with you, at times it can get a little bit sort of muffled, but please do stick with it. It is an incredibly interesting chat, as I've said, and Lauren speaks so passionately about Walt Disney and the archives. So in this chat, we look at primarily his two offices, which were actually recreated in 2015, and also discuss when the archive was formed. So just sit back and relax as Lauren and I discuss the Disney archives. Essentially, Lauren, the floor is yours, but I have to start by asking, Disney archives, where did the love of Disney start?
The love of Disney started very much from just a young age, being very, very enthusiastic and very into Disney. A bit of a Disney geek, I suppose, from a very young age. And very interested in Walt Disney as a person as well from a young age. I've always been interested in history. And I think when you get an interest in history, you want to know the history of everything that you're interested in. So my kind of interest in the history of Disney and the history of Walt Disney specifically, it's always been quite prominent from quite a young age. But the kind of fascination with the archives, I think, comes from my own kind of professional background. So my background's in museums. I've always worked in museums. I've done some archive work myself. So it's kind of the cross point where both my fascination with Disney and my kind of interest in my own profession kind of crosses. Is where it all amalgamates is the Disney archive. And for me as well, I must say it's like the dream job. Imagine working in the Disney archive where basically the entire history of the Disney company is kept. It's quite amazing. So I can't help but find that fascinating, just from my own sort of personal, professional background as well.
We're going to talk today about, as we said, the Disney archives. This is something that you started as an Instagram series, and this is actually how I came up to you.
So like I say, the Disney fascination, I had to kind of like filter it into my Instagram in some way. So I started like a kind of culture-based Instagram as a lockdown project. And kind of pick up on a lot of kind of historical aspects that I find interesting. And I just started chatting about Disney, and a lot of people were getting in touch saying they're big Disney fans. And I thought, right, I could maybe do some kind of feature, some kind of Disney history feature. So I've tried to do it as like an A to Z of Disney history, but trying to focus on maybe slightly lesser known aspects of the Disney company, because there's just so much content out there to do with Disney. And my letter A was my way to bring in the archives and to start chatting about the archives. And it was really funny because when I posted the archives post, I had quite a few people get in touch with me saying, I don't know why, but I've just never thought about Disney having an archive. Like, it makes sense, obviously, that they do have one. I've never ever thought about it. I never thought about the importance of it. And I don't know if it's because a lot of the exhibitions that they do and a lot of the stuff they highlight is mainly based in the States. So we don't really hear about it much here. So it was really nice to kind of highlight that to people and highlight a lot of the work that they do and just kind of the mammoth task that they had having to archive, everything that the Disney company are involved in, because they wear many hats. It's not just the films. They archive everything to do with it.
Yeah, it's also something for me as well. I had no idea that there people that were getting in touch with you. And it's so funny because I used to work in a company archive. So I don't even know why for a second I didn't think that Disney would have one.
Yeah, lots of people have said the same.
So it was like the series is amazing, and anyone listening, like, you definitely need to check Lauren out, and I'll link her Instagram in the show notes below. I came across you on Instagram and I was like, I need to chat to this lass. This is perfect. And I do think archives are a really important aspect of art history. And I would completely argue that Disney is an art form in every sense.
Absolutely.
And so could you just give us like a little bit of background of when the archive started, because Walt and his brother founded the company in 1923, because you don't really hear about Walt's brother too much.
No, absolutely not. His brother Roy was very much the businessman. So Walt was the dreamer. Walt had all the big ideas, but Roy was the one that helped, keep the business ticking over. So very important man as well. But Walt was very much the figurehead, and it was Roy. Roy wanted him as the figurehead. But the archives never really came into play until the 1970s, and this was 4 years after Walt Disney had passed away. And I think this was a kind of big transitional period for the company. It was a bit of a wake-up call that, the kind of man at the helm wasn't there anymore. He was a very hands-on part of the company. So the kind of need to preserve the history of the company was kind of more paramount than ever. And it was Walt's brother Roy that kind of threw up the idea that they needed to have an archive. They needed to have something not only to preserve Walt's legacy, but also the legacy of the countless people that had been involved in making the Disney company what it was. And like you say, the company was founded in 1923. So by the time we got to the late 60s, a lot of the people that had been involved from the beginning were beginning to retire and left the company. So I think there was a bit of a worry of, where are we going to go now? That the company is going to completely change. So we need to make sure that we have everything preserved and archived that Walt and the entire team had worked towards up until that point. And like a lot of things with the Disney company and a lot of these stories, it was kind of these right place, right time kind of scenarios. The Disney executives were kind of having a conversation in the library of the UCLA about, how do we go about archiving, this mammoth amount of objects, of artworks, of plans. And there was a gentleman named Dave Smith who was primarily a librarian, but he was kind of compiling a bibliography on the life of Walt Disney. And he just happened to be within earshot of this conversation going on and kind of took a leap of faith and put himself forward to be the first head of the Disney archives. And Disney hired him on the spot. Said, right, you're the man for the job. This is your role now. And the first main project he was given was to archive Walt Disney's offices, which were in the Disney Studios in Burbank, California, because up until that point, they'd just kind of been left in situ. And Dave Smith primarily saw it as, the offices themselves as really important, cultural artifacts. Everything that had been conducted in these office spaces had went on to produce some of the best loved films of the time, where Disneyland had, been created from these offices. He was very keen to make sure that the entire office space was archived in an appropriate way, because for future historians, this was really, really valuable information. So the first kind of major project for the archives. Everything had been locked up. It doesn't bear thinking about if it had just been cleared out, or because when we're going to talk about some of the kind of important stuff that was in there and the kind of important insight it gives us into Walt Disney as a person, not just this figurehead of this huge company. But yes, Dave Smith and his team went in, and the kind of primary focus was to photograph absolutely everything in situ, so that there would be a reference point. At this point, he would never know that anything would get done with these, but he found it very important to make sure that absolutely everything in those office spaces were photographed in situ as it was, as Walt had left it basically, and that everything would be packed away and preserved in an appropriate manner so it would stand the test of time, that it would be there for future historians, for filmmakers, for writers, and for ultimately for the public, which would it would be used for in the future, to have this kind of long-lasting connection to Walt Disney himself. I think it's an amazing testament to Dave Smith and his role, that he really saw the importance of doing this and doing it right as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, a complete visionary. And there's so many like horror stories now of companies that are like, oh, we just went in and we didn't really think about the future. We chucked all this stuff out. But he preserved everything in Walt's 2 offices, which is something I find very, very interesting. Let's move forward to the first image that we're going to talk about. And also just to say to everyone that is listening, all the images that we talk about, you can find them either on my website or you can find them on my Instagram. And again, I'll link all of this in the show notes. Yeah, if you just want to explain what the first office space that we're looking at, because it's an office.
It is. It's very much an office, and it's a very humble office. I think that's the one thing you take from it. I think it's important to remember that Walt Disney was very successful in his lifetime. You know, he's not one of these people that became really successful after he died. He was a very, very successful person in his lifetime. So when you look at his office, it's basically, this is his formal office. This is the office where he would entertain people. He liked to do a lot of publicity. He utilized television a lot. And this is a lot of the time when you see any footage of him, this is where he'll be sat. This is where he'll be conducting interviews from, or talking about creating Disneyland from. This is the office that was done from. So yeah, it's a very humble office. It's a desk, and behind him he has some shelving, of which I find is very interesting actually, what he kind of chooses to display to the public. This is his public kind of, Mr. Disney. And like I say, he was a very successful person in his lifetime. Walt Disney and the Disney Company had over 950 different awards and accolades while he was living. But none of that's really displayed to the public. He won countless Oscars, countless awards. But what he chooses to display is, little tokens from his childhood or memorabilia from some of his films. Obviously, there's a lot of focus on family as well. His office is just jammed full of photos of his wife, of his children, of his grandchildren. But I think it's really interesting to see on the kind of prominent shelving spaces behind him, instead of having, his scores of Oscars and accolades, he chooses to show the world, his little trinkets that he's collected from his childhood and, models that he's made himself. And this space is very much where he would get a lot of his inspiration from. So I think it's, important to see that kind of where he came from, his kind of humble beginnings, were always prominent in his mind when creating, and never forgetting where he came from. He was very much, I think he's very much like the ultimate American dream. He came from very humble beginnings. He came from, him and his brother Roy, from poverty, and basically built their company from the ground up. And you kind of see that in his office. He's not the kind of flashy, in your face, Mr. Success, Mr. America type thing. He's very much the family man. And I think that's quite a nice insight into the person that he actually is. He's almost like a kind of mythical figure now, Walt Disney, when you think of, the elaborate, things that go on in Disneyland and, everything that Disney kind of owns and capitalizes on. But Walt Disney himself, I think, seeing his office is a nice way to connect to him as a person and kind of see what really meant something to him.
What I can see is, like you said, there's a lot of family photos and some knickknacks in the back, but he also has some quite interesting things on his desk and around him. Do you know anything about the bell or the plane, for example, that's there? I think because that for me is two things that really stand out.
Yeah, the bell was actually used by his secretary staff to announce when he had to go for his lunch. Because he was quite often someone that was so immersed in his work that he would not, know when to break to go for lunch.
Okay.
Walt Disney was this kind of forward-thinking person. He'd done a lot of work on environmental issues. He liked to, highlight conservation of animals' habitats, of the environment, and he did do a kind of series, a television series surrounding the environment. And this was one of the kind of gifts that was given to him by the Coast Guard for highlighting issues that go on in the environment, particularly in the oceans. But it was used quite frequently to remind him to go for his lunch. It was his lunch bell. And his planes, I believe, are just, again, it's his kind of hobby of collecting these models. It's really just for his own kind of pleasure. It's not a status symbol. It's not, anything like that. It's more just the things that he likes to surround himself with, which I think is really nice. And then amongst the memorabilia at the back, there's a small figurine of Bambi that he made himself. He liked to make models as well, so he made that during the kind of concept sort of artwork stage of Bambi. So yeah, it's not there's nothing really to throw up the kind of Mr. Success. It is all very much family man, the kind of, the man that likes to build models, the kind of really just humble. That's what I take from it, looking at it. Thinking of the kind of space that he could have had, definitely nothing compared to, having all these Oscars out on display for everyone to see. As much as I'm sure that probably, it was a major accolade for the company, I think he was someone that didn't kind of pin everything on that type of success. He was very much right, okay, we've done well in this aspect, but we need to look forward and see how well we can keep advancing and keep doing better. We can't go on the back foot just because we've won X amount of Oscars. We need to keep evolving the company and keep ahead of the curve. So I think you get a lot of that from his office space, definitely.
You wouldn't suspect that this is the office of, well, definitely one of America's most successful men that were living and building and expanding their empire, because Disney
Absolutely.
is. So this is the office, and he has like photos of his children in the background,
Yes.
and his little sort of figurines. And is there anything else in this office that's of particular interest?
Obviously, he had his family there a lot as well. And when they were I must say, this office space was reinstated in 2015. So it was the archive, the Disney family, and the CEO of Disney at the time, Bob Iger, decided that they wanted to reinstate this space because of its cultural significance. And they were only able to do that because of all the previous work that Dave Smith had done, documenting everything in situ. But the Disney family had said, particularly some of Walt's grandchildren, that this is exactly how they remembered his office, because they would visit him there frequently. It was very much cozy, warm space that they liked to occupy. So I think it's really nice to have that testament from the Disney family as well, to say that, this is the exact reflection of Walt Disney. So it is a lasting testament to why the archive was important, not only installing it because it's got a historical significance, but this can be viewed by the public. Fans of Disney can come and kind of get that connection to Walt Disney that you can't really get anywhere else, I suppose, even at Disneyland. There is still that kind of, building it for public use, for public, enjoyment. But this space was very much for his own personal enjoyment, which I think is really, really interesting. What is also situated in that office is the piano. There's a lot of people might already know about this actually. There is a piano that occupies this space, which Walt Disney purchased in the 1940s. And I think a lot of us associate music with Disney films. Disney music's probably just as prominent as the films themselves. And the kind of golden age of Disney song was probably first brought in by Walt's work with Richard and Robert Sherman, or the Sherman Brothers as they were called, this kind of songwriting duo. These were the people that brought us the music from Mary Poppins, from the Jungle Book. They really kind of propelled that kind of sinking of the animation and the music being just as prominent as everything else. But he became very, very close with the Sherman Brothers. The Sherman Brothers occupied space within the Disney studios as well. However, they would often, on a weekly basis, hold counsel with Walt Disney, just bringing across ideas, sitting around the piano to throw up new ideas. Also, the famous story is that Walt Disney's favourite song was Feed the Birds from Mary Poppins. And if ever he was having kind of a down moment, or just kind of, feeling a bit of a loss, which we don't really think about someone like Walt Disney, doing, as much as he's a human being, he has this very kind of cheery, like sunny disposition. If you ever see him talking on anything, this kind of public perception that he has. But he would request the Sherman Brothers to come and play him that song when he was kind of feeling maybe a bit down, or things weren't quite going his way. And it kind of lifted his spirits. And I think that's the whole kind of thing that goes behind Disney films, is we watch them, we listen to the music. So many people have stayed in lockdown. Oh, thank goodness for Disney Plus, because it's kind of kept me going. It really boosts your mood. He felt that himself. A lot of these ideas and things that we all enjoy from Disney have come from things that he himself enjoyed. So the piano is very prominent. It's a very personal thing, obviously, to him. However, there's a lot of really good documentaries about the Sherman brothers, and they always talk about the fact that, they were kind of united around the piano and through music. So it's again a really, really nice connection to Walt Disney and the type of person he was. But one thing that I found really interesting, and I hadn't noticed it before, and when I was looking at photographs, the photograph of the piano which I'd sent you, and I was just kind of looking at everything that was surrounding the piano and on the piano, and obviously there's lots of music sheets. Again, he's got photographs of his family, he's got a statue of Mickey Mouse, but he also has a kind of small bronze replica statue of the Little Mermaid statue, which is in Copenhagen, the kind of one based of the Hans Christian Andersen. Now, probably when most of us think of the Little Mermaid now, we think of the Disney film, The Little Mermaid. Now, that wasn't made until more than 20 years after Walt Disney's death. And I found it really intriguing to see that he had this statue of the Little Mermaid. And when I kind of looked into it a bit more, The Little Mermaid and also Beauty and the Beast were two ideas that Walt had and wanted to make into film. But he strikes me as one of these people that just had so many ideas, too many ideas almost, all fighting to kind of take prominence. And particularly later in his life, it was the parks, the Disney theme parks that took prominence. But kind of in the late 70s into the 80s, Disney animation kind of took a bit of a nosedive, to be honest. It was not the kind of golden age of Disney animation that we know from the 50s. The films just weren't as popular. It was the theme parks that were generating all the money. And this became a bit of a cause of concern for the kind of executives at Disney, because the way they saw it was the films drove everything. If you don't have new films, you're never going to have new things to add to the parks, new merchandise, whatever. There will come a point where the company might grow stagnant. So they desperately tried to come up with new ideas for films that would work. And the film that sparked the kind of what is called the Disney Renaissance was The Little Mermaid. So it goes to show that, through kind of these original ideas that Walt had, which are all archived, are all in the archive, the Disney company themselves, when they were really down on their luck, looked to Walt even over 20 years after he had passed away to come up with, where do we move next? What is the next move for animation? And they took one of his ideas, which kind of steamrolled them back into, what we know as one of the best times for Disney animation. It gave us, The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, The Lion King. These films came one after another, but it was The Little Mermaid that drove that. So I thought it was really quite, something to see that statue on his piano and know that was a major source of one of his inspirations, and that these thoughts and all these ideas that he had, which locked away in the archive, still go on to kind of inspire the Disney company today. He's very much still a part of the company, as are his ideas.
Because they actively encourage their staff members to come and sort of be in the office and just sort of be inspired in the way that Walt was as well, which I think is a wonderful thing to have on site.
Yes, absolutely.
And as well as being able to explore the archives, which are absolutely humongous as well.
Crazy, I know, and only growing. I think this is the thing with Disney that we know now. I know this is maybe some element of Disney that maybe bugs people, is that they do wear so many hats. They have, many fingers and many pies, and they now own Marvel, they own Star Wars, they've just acquired 20th Century Fox. And because of that, their archive is only getting bigger. So they have a lot, and it does cover everything. It covers all the theme parks. The amount of theme parks that are now around the world is phenomenal. It covers absolutely everything. But you're right, I think the office space itself, reinstating that, encouraging staff members to go and kind of feel inspired and feel that connection to Walt Disney is really, really important. And it shows that they are still desperately, clinging on to him as the figurehead of the company, that no matter how they evolve or how much time goes past, he is very much still, at the center of, everything that the company does. And so much of that was driven from what he created in those offices.
I read this really lovely thing while I was preparing for this podcast, where in his first Disney site, when they were building it, he actually had a little apartment above the fire station.
Yeah.
And whenever he was there, he used to put a light on in the window just so his employees knew that he was there. And as like a tribute, the light is, so the apartment still exists,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not used, and they leave the light on constantly, just as a reminder to employees that he's always there.
He's there. Yeah, it's lovely. Yeah, and it is very much. I believe that's kind of something that they want to instill across the board in every single department and aspect of the company, which is massive. Is that he is very much still the kind of prominent figure and the person that they would kind of. They all say that they kind of sit and ask. You watch so many documentaries where they all sit and ask, what would Walt do? In the tough times, what would he do? And that's obviously exactly what they asked themselves when the animation department was going through a bad spate and threw up the idea of bringing the Little Mermaid to life. Because that's probably exactly what Walt would have done if he had lived longer. That's exactly his plans.
It's just amazing. So this is what his first office that you can that you look into. But there's a second office.
There is, yeah. So this is kind of the kind of more informal, but probably the more get to work office. So when you look at it initially, again, it's just a very kind of basic office space. There's not much to really kind of pick up on. There's no, even now we've lost the toys, all of that kind of stuff. But this was the Nerf Center, basically, where he built up a lot of ideas. Prominently Disneyland. This is where Disneyland was created. Again, touching on the kind of future inspirations, when you look behind where his chair is, there's stacks and stacks of files, and also his bag is sat underneath the table, underneath these files. I always think seeing really personal belongings of, I suppose he is a historical figure now, that really brings a connection, these really personal effects of people. And he used this bag to bring in his ideas, from home. I get the impression he was probably one of those people that just never switched off and constantly, coming up with ideas. He said that, his wife Lillian was his counsel. He would just constantly come at her with ideas about things, and he would go into his office the next day with stacks of ideas and, very, very clear ideas of what he wanted, and 9 times out of 10 they work. I think it's really interesting to see all of these ideas, and all of these files are the original files of thought processes that he had. He was very much someone that looked to the future, and whether he was compiling a lot of these ideas, knowing full well that he probably wouldn't see them come to life, but leaving them as a legacy for his team and for the Disney company to put into practice, who knows? I have a feeling he did have that kind of foresight, though. Very much wanted the company to outlive him. But it's amazing to see that, again, because of the foresight of Dave Smith and the archive team, that they saw the importance of all these ideas. Just because they weren't happening then didn't mean they couldn't happen in the future. And one of those big ideas is over on the wall in the kind of informal office, there is a huge aerial photograph of Disneyland. So Disneyland was, again, one of these ideas where Walt just seemed to know exactly what he wanted, how it was going to look, how people would interact with it, all of the attractions, everything. He just kind of had it in his brain, which I find fascinating. And you can see that from the photograph. It's a huge aerial photograph with kind of labels, kind of pinpointing where everything will be, where some of the most famous attractions, theme park attractions in the world, Pirates of the Caribbean, the Haunted Mansion, the reasons people still today go and visit the Disney park. He had all these ideas straight away. Just to the left of that, there is a plan for what was his kind of future project. It was the Florida project. So the ideas for Walt Disney World were very much put into play by Walt Disney himself. And this is where he got really wrapped up in this idea kind of at the later end of his life. But unfortunately, he would never get to see it come into play. But the main kind of driving force behind the Florida project, as much as he wanted to recreate a kind of magic kingdom that was there in California, was the Epcot project. So that was the experimental prototype community of tomorrow. Now, does not sound like the kind of draw for a theme park by any stretch of the imagination. But like I said, he was very interested in the future. He was very interested in how we look after the world, how we create a sustainable community, all these things we still talk about now. Environment, all these things. And Epcot was going to be this kind of, future world that we could visit, and, to show people how we can look after our wildlife, how we can look after our natural world, how we can be a better community. And he was very passionate about this. He'd done a lot of television appearances about it. He had a lot of ideas about it, but unfortunately he would never live to see that come into play. But again, because he left behind this wealth of material that the archive kind of took and saw the significance of, the Disney team he left behind were able to make that a reality. And you can now go and visit Epcot. It's one of the 4 major theme parks that are in Florida, and probably Walt Disney World, I imagine, is the most famous park out of all of them now. So he is very much, again, this kind of driving force, from even beyond the grave. All of this that was left behind was very much kind of picked up on by the archive and by his team to want to honour his wishes. And I think especially the Epcot project, they wanted to make sure that actually became a reality. So I think it's amazing to see this. It looks a very small office, this kind of space that's kind of thrown up some of the biggest kind of additions to our modern culture, really. Disneyland, Disney World, these Disney theme parks are such a huge phenomenon now. And all of this was driven from this small kind of space, this really kind of unassuming space in Burbank in California. But just, looking at all these files and all these plans, as much as they look very unassuming, they are very much the driving force, and still the driving force of the decisions that get made in the company today. But again, it all boils down to why the archive was important, because if they just kind of thought, oh, well, we've made Disneyland, we don't need to keep the plans for them anymore, or, the Florida project, we're probably never going to get around to it, just, who knows. Or if they hadn't kind of documented it in an appropriate way, as someone that works in a museum, or an archive, all too well about how you have to treat these materials, these historical materials, to make sure they stand the test of time and that they're there for future generations to use. They made sure all of that was done with such care that it has been kept. And as a result, we've seen some of the biggest contributions to the entertainment industry that we've ever seen in our lifetime.
Dave Smith and his team need to be applauded and held up as an example of how you do it, because everything, like you said, everything can be so important. And just because perhaps technology is not available now, doesn't mean that in the future you can't then implement it. I mean, because Disneyland was one of the first places where animatronic characters came into
exactly
force.
Yeah, exactly. I think the Disney parks took the whole company to a completely different level, and I think it was a bit of a self-indulgence for Walt Disney, because he was so interested in these future technological advances. And these animatronics are things that have went on to influence, not only other theme parks, but how films are made. You see all these big films like Jurassic Park and, E.T., things like that. That has all been driven from the kind of innovative procedures that were thrown up through Disneyland. So the contributions that they've made, not only I think the animation's only scratching the surface. Everything else that had been kind of conjured up in those office spaces have went on to have huge influences way over and above they probably ever imagined that they would.
Yeah, it's just incredible. It really, really is. And also what I think is so brilliant is that they're very open as well about the archive and the types of things that they keep here. I've got some, if you've got other figures, do let me know. But currently it's across 4 warehouses.
Yeah.
There's 2 offices. They have 10,000 costumes, 30,000 props from sets, but also, as you mentioned earlier, they have props from rides. So if rides have closed down or they've been upgraded, they keep parts of the old characters and things inside, as well as millions of pictures that I watched a little thing with Dave Smith, and he was like, we will never, ever get through the amount of photos that are in this archive. It would be a 10-year job.
But like you say, it's that kind of, the way that they've done it right. And they see that even though they know the kind of mammoth task that they have, they're still willing to, everything they do, they're going to do it right. And they're going to treat it with care and treat everything with the kind of cultural significance and the historical importance that comes with it. I suppose that makes it probably quite exciting for future historians, for future researchers, to know that there'll be things that they'll still keep discovering. There's so much there. There's such a wealth of information that is being kept, that there's, such a huge opportunity for future projects, for future films to be made. I mean, the Walt Disney offices was studied extensively for the film Saving Mr. Banks, which stars Tom Hanks as Walt Disney, and it tracks the kind of process which went into making Mary Poppins, which was by no means an easy venture. So much of that took place in those offices. So having that resource there for the filmmakers, they must have thought they'd won the lottery. They had literally everything there to then go on and recreate for their film, to make sure it was as authentic portrayal as possible to the environment that inspired this film, including the piano, including, his desk and everything that went into it. So it's an invaluable resource for so many reasons. And that's just that one office. Like you say, the kind of wealth of objects, of artifacts, of papers, photographs that they have, it kind of leaves you open to so many opportunities as to what you can do with that. And the archive do regular exhibitions. They just unfortunately never come to the UK. They're always kind of in America, or these kind of different expos that they decide to do. But like I said, that is the 50th anniversary this year of the archives being founded. It's a bit of a shame. It's also the 65th anniversary of Disneyland. So they've had a lot of big, anniversaries this year, which unfortunately they've not really been able to do very much for, given the current circumstances. But the Bowers Museum of Art in California have just had the go-ahead to open the new exhibition there, marking the 50th anniversary of the Disney archives, which I think it has over 400 objects, which, like you say, that's only scratching the surface, really, of the wealth of objects that they actually have. But it's given an opportunity for the public to come and kind of have that connection to the costumes, the drawings, the theme park attractions, and it really highlights what the archive have been doing for 50 years, which is a phenomenal amount of work.
I think also what it's so important in showing is just how important archives are. I don't know about you, but like coming from, because I'm a museum and background as well, I find so many people don't really understand why archives are so important and why you need to take such good care of these things, because it's kind of like an uphill battle trying to convince people that this is historically relevant, and particularly when I've worked in archives and I've showed people things and they've been like, well, why can't I touch it, why can't I handle it? It's like there's you need to think of future generations as well here, and how this can be used not just now but in the future. Like you said, the office is being used for the films. That's just an amazing resource. And also that they're able to, I mean, for this, I had no idea. You have like opened my eyes to the world of the Disney archives. So I'm sure you're very well aware of it. But I had never heard of the D23, which is like the Disney membership club thing, which was news to me. And they also run a YouTube channel. So anyone that's listening, if you are interested at all in learning more about the archive, they have a really amazing series, which I've near enough finished the entire weekend because it was just so good. It's a series called Armchair Archivist, and they take you through all these different things, and they look at things like the Star Wars movie and that part of the archive, and the Tron and Pirates of the Caribbean, and just all these amazing things that Disney do. So if anyone's listening that you would like to know more, I would highly recommend that you tune into that if you're not an avid reader and you prefer just to have sort of something on in the background while you potter. But it's such a brilliant resource that they're very open and
they're brilliant at doing all that. They've got a really good kind of prominence online. Also, the archives have got a really good Instagram and Twitter account. I'm sure it's at Walt Disney Archives, and they're great as well. They'll do kind of little spotlights on really rare kind of memorabilia or costumes, or if it's coming up to Halloween, they'll do a spotlight on films like Hocus Pocus or The Nightmare Before Christmas, or the attractions. It's brilliant. They post such interesting content, and like you say, it highlights why these things are important, why they've kept them, why we need to keep them. So it not only gives you a bit of Disney history, it gives you a bit of an insight into how the archive itself works and why it's deemed really important. So I definitely recommend following them on their social media platforms as well, because they post some really, really fascinating stuff.
Yeah, no, I would completely agree. Lauren, I just have to say you have been an absolute fountain of knowledge and enthusiasm.
Thank you so much.
No, gosh, thank you. This has been amazing, and you've spoken so beautifully about the archives, and just from these sort of 4 or 5 images that you have given so much. So thank you for being so generous with your knowledge and your time.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I always appreciate any kind of time where I can indulge and chat a bit of Disney. So I really, really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
So before you go, I have one question, which is not archive related, but it's how I'm trying to end every podcast by asking my guest one last final thing.
Yeah, of course.
So this is the Joe's Art History podcast, and you can take this question as wide or as sort of narrow as you like, but quite a big question. Why is art important?
That is a big question. I think art to me is important because it's a way to see how other people see the world. It's a way to view other thought processes. It's a way to view emotions. It's, a way to inspire and to maybe see things differently that we wouldn't, necessarily see them ourselves. Working in galleries and museums, I've often get surprised with some, art installations that we have, and it really can, it's a very powerful thing. It can evoke so much emotion and can really help change our viewpoint and our kind of understanding of the world. And it's a nice way to connect with people, I think.
No, amazing. And beautifully answered. Thank you so much. So Lauren, before you go, where can people find you and what you're up to?
So you can find me mostly on Instagram. I am at That Museum Girl with an underscore after the L, and it's the same handle for Twitter if you're on Twitter. And there is a link to my blog via Instagram as well. Still continuing the Disney history series. I am up to I've just posted the letter M, so we're looking at artist Mary Blair if anyone's interested in that. And now that kind of the world is hopefully starting to reopen a little bit more, I'm kind of doing some more museum visits, hopefully heading back to Scotland next week. So I'll be doing some more kind of Edinburgh focused things as well. But there will always be plenty Disney. I will always find a way to kind of feed in some good Disney history trivia for you all.
And there you have it, the end of another episode of the Joe's Art History podcast. I would just once again like to thank Lauren for sitting down with me and just a fantastic chat, and I really hope you enjoyed it. I left this feeling so positive, and like I said in the podcast, I will leave links to Lauren's blog and Instagram page below, as well as some links to the images which were referred to throughout this podcast. And of course, the Disney Archive YouTube series, which I mentioned, called Armchair Archivist. If you'd like to get in touch and discuss anything that you heard in the podcast today, please do. You can email me, joesarthistory@gmail.com, or you can follow me on Instagram @joesarthistory, and you can get in touch with me via there. Once again, thank you so much for listening. I hope you've learned a little something or two. I know I certainly have. And I look forward to seeing you again on the Joe's Art History podcast. Until then, keep learning, and remember, art is for all. Bye-bye.